This is Tim Hague Reads Books, presented by Tim Hague. Lawrence Block freely concedes that he's made a hopeless mess of retirement. At 75, he is busier than ever, still writing several series of books, overseeing special editions of his back catalogue and negotiating movie adaptations. A Matthew Scudder film is due out next year. Tim is a fan of Lawrence Block in general, and of the Bernie Rodenbach series in particular. It is nearly 10 years since the last Burglar book, so Tim was dying to read it. LB lives in New York City and Tim in London, so Tim and Larry got together on the phone to discuss The Burglar Who Counted the Spoons.
By happy chance, I have been reading a lot of classic American mystery writing recently. You know, the Dashiell Hammett, the James M. Cain, the Raymond Chandler stuff, the stuff with intricate plots and razor-sharp dialogue and an utter commitment to forward narrative. And but by similar happy chance, one contemporary writer who is keeping these virtues alive is Lawrence Block, whose new book is The Burglar Who Counted the Spoons. Well, it was the new book this morning. It might not be this afternoon because, Larry, you're a bit of a phenomenon. You seem to be writing more now than you ever did, and it's like there's a new book or a magazine story every week. Is that true, or is it just my impression?
I think it's largely an impression, Tim, because a lot of my early work is getting republished. So it looks as though I'm much busier than I am.
Well, you published your first books, I think, was it the 1950s, under a confusing range of noms de plume. Am I right in saying your early work was largely, well, now shall we call it erotica or porn?
I like to call it mid-century erotica.
And a lot of that is being republished now with all the other things that you did as well. So you've been a professional writer for 50 or 60 years.
About 55 years, I think, something like that.
Crumbs. It is a bit hard to know where to start with you because you are a bit of a cottage industry. I mean, even now you've got 4 or 5 series going. You publish yourself as well as handing books over to other publishers. You run an online bookshop, I know, with special editions and offers and signed copies and freebies for the faithful. You also do an enormous amount of travelling. How do you get it all done? Many people would have retired after half a century or so.
Well, I've thought I was retired a couple of times, Tim. I thought, about 5 years ago, I really thought I was done writing novels, and then there were a couple more, and again I thought I was done. And just this summer, I went off on a cruise dedicated solely to the purpose of getting a book written, and I came back with The Burglar Who Counted the Spoons. So I think I've just made an absolute dog's breakfast of retirement. I'm just not good at it.
Let's talk about Bernie Rodenbach, who is the principal character in The Burglar Who Counted the Spoons, and indeed in all of these burglar books. And he really is a burglar. That's really who he is, isn't he? Tell me about Bernie.
Well, Bernie is a very nice fellow, an affable gentleman, well-read. He runs a secondhand bookstore in Greenwich Village, and is just a perfect fellow with one character defect, and that's that he steals. And I began writing about Bernie, oh my goodness, in the mid-'70s, I guess it was. I think the first book, Burglars Can't Be Choosers, came out in 1977. And at the time, I had no idea writing that book that I would go on writing more about him. But The Burglar Who Counted the Spoons is number 11. And Bernie, fortunately, stays the same age forever, which is a great...
I was going to point that out because Scudder, for instance, in one of your other series, he develops, he changes. Bernie is always the same age and is always the same character. I mean, the bookshop is he bought it, I think, in about the third book along the way, didn't he? But he is a fixed point, isn't he?
Yes, and it's fortunate because I think if he evolved in any way, the premise of the series would no longer work. He has to stay pretty much the same. With Matthew Scudder, it operates on a different level of reality, and I've found that the character had to grow and change and age, and it's now rather difficult to imagine continuing to write about Matthew Scudder, though I still find him interesting, but he's a little old to be an action hero. Poor chap.
Bernie, on the other hand, is just great fun. Is it true that you won an informal competition with your crime writer peers for the most inappropriate casting for your central character in a movie adaptation?
I don't know that there was any competition involved, but the idea that Bernie would indeed be played by Whoopi Goldberg in the film did come as a considerable surprise to many of us.
Because she hasn't played a lot of middle-aged Jewish men in the past. It's odd casting, isn't it?
It is, yes.
So tell me, did having movie adaptations of your books change the way you write at all?
I don't think so. I try to put all of that out of my mind when I'm writing. The the movie that will be coming out in September is A Walk Among the Tombstones with Liam Neeson playing Matthew Scudder. And I suppose were I to write another Scudder, I would probably have to make a certain amount of effort not to keep seeing Liam Neeson in the role. But I think once I get into a book, it has its own reality sufficiently so that nothing much intrudes.
I mentioned the sort of doyens of American crime writing or mystery writing earlier on. You are more or less in love with that stuff, aren't you? I can see conscious evocations and references back to it. I mean, you reference a lot of contemporary writers as well, but am I right in thinking that you look back to that as a golden age?
Oh, I think every age is a golden age. I think an awful lot of what is being written right now is of similar quality. Um, but I think it's the one great advantage the past has is it's much easier to be nostalgic about it.
That's very true. How do you keep Bernie's voice so clear? These books are in the first person, so it's Bernie talking to us, and he's extremely good company, which I think is very important to the books. Do you go back and read the previous ones, or is it Larry Block's voice that I'm hearing there? Because I read your newsletter, your online newsletter, and there's a lot of the same tone of voice in there that there is in these books.
I'm sure there is, but I think the characters in various series tend to have different narrative voices, and it's uh, it's somehow the easiest thing in the world for me to just get into the voice. I wrote an eighth book about Evan Tanner, one character of mine who's involved in foreign adventure generally. And I had written seven of the books in the 60s and 70s. And then I wrote the eighth in, I think it was 1998. There was something like 28 years between book seven and eight. And I thought it might be difficult to get into the voice. And all I did was sit down, and it was just there as if Evan Tanner had been occupying a couple of brain cells all these years just waiting for a chance to speak again. So I can't really take credit for it. That's a gift that I'm grateful for.
Well, I said that the way that these books work is that Bernie has to be good company. Is that necessary because of the moral ambiguity? I mean, he's a thief after all.
I think that's part of it. One finds him good company and thus is willing to excuse his being a thief. But I have another character that you mentioned before, Keller, who's an assassin for hire. When the money's paid, he goes out and kills someone, and people find themselves very conflicted about Keller. I remember one time I was doing a reading, and a woman said that that she thought I was doing something very subversive here. She said she was sitting in her chair reading, and she found herself looking off into the middle of the middle distance and actually saying out loud, Well, so he kills people. What's so bad about that? And I hadn't intended to provoke that sort of reaction on the part of a reader, but it kind of delighted me that I had.
Yeah, but you were before your time as well. I mean, she must have been delighted with Dexter on television, the serial killer on TV.
I suppose she was.
Most of your books are set in, most of these are set in New York City, which is, of course, where you live. And I'm modestly familiar with New York, and I was able to follow Bernie round with the aid of a city map. Is it important to you to get the geography right, and in fact, all the background? Is that a point of pride?
Well, it's important to me not to get it wrong, because that just takes a reader right out of a narrative if he sees that something is not as he knows it to be. At the same time, I have to keep it in mind that I'm not writing guidebooks, and I don't want to put an excessive amount of landscape and such.
I've been careful not to give away any of the plot details because half of the pleasure in a book like this is seeing how you set up the various strands that seem to have nothing to do with each other, and then you bring them together again. And you've even given us a scene in which Bernie gets to say, "You're probably wondering why I've gathered you all together in this bookshop," which, by the way, delighted me. I love these little flashbacks. I get the impression, finally, from reading, in particular, the Burglar books, which I find delightful because they're so funny and they're so frothy and friendly. I get the impression that you think reading ought to be fun, and you do, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. I don't want a book to be a struggle.
Is it as much fun to write them? Do you love the mechanics of putting them together?
Yes and no. When it's going well, it just feels wonderful. But there's no getting away from the fact that it's hard work.
Well, Lawrence Block, the hard work has paid off. The Burglar Who Counted the Spoons is enormous fun. I romped through it. It's published by, LB, which stands for Lawrence Block. So it's published by you in America at $14.99, which is a really good price for a trade paperback in America these days. And it's available as an ebook as well, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it will be coming in the UK from Orion, though I don't know exactly when.
And people come to you because you have a website and a newsletter through which you sell first editions and signed editions and things. Where do people come if they want to get something special?
Just www.lawrenceblock.com.
Well, I'm signed up. Larry, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Tim.
That was Tim Haig Reads Books. Tim Haig Reads Books is a Green Shoot production. You can find out more at green-shoot.com, and Tim can be contacted on tim@green-shoot.com.